The Rebel Capitalist Show.
You think we're going into a time where we're going to have more or a push towards deglobalization?
Well, we are in that time, but I would say more than that. You know, having studied currency life cycle issues, and when we transfer or transition from one system to the next system, every single area that you typically see around that transition, I am seeing right now.
Are you talking about kind of this de-dollarization that we're seeing globally? When, you know, going back to Russia, that was kind of the financial nuclear button that was pushed with these sanctions, and when they froze the dollar assets of the Russian central bank. You know, that's something that had never been done before with a central bank in one of these types of countries. So then all of the other countries, even our friends, look and say, whoa, wait a minute. If the United States is willing to do that to the central bank of Russia, okay, we're friends with the US right now, but who knows in 5 years, in 10 years. So we better get rid of all these dollar assets on our balance sheet, because we don't want the West, we don't want our assets as a liability of the West, i.e. dollars.
But it's bigger than that, and it's longer than that, because the move away from the dollar as a reserve asset has really been in place since the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. But what we're also finding is that as these countries divest themselves from dollars, there are new reserve assets, meaning new reserve currencies, that are coming up in their place. So, you think about it, the euro was created to take over from the dollar as the world reserve currency, and that obviously didn't happen. But it did become a secondary global reserve asset. Well, what we're actually seeing is when countries are selling their dollar or their dollar assets, the normal thought would be that they would go into the euro or the Japanese assets and currencies, right? The traditional, or, this is not a long-term tradition, but the short-term traditional reserve assets. And that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is that money is shifting into smaller countries that, interestingly enough, are those countries that are accumulating gold.
So
it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. So the settlement, the currency of settlement, is transitioning to the currencies of some of these smaller countries or smaller economies, like India. Let's say not smaller country, but smaller economy. And and what you're seeing is that the currencies that are being used more in settlement, those countries, their central banks are accumulating more gold than they are dollars.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. I see.
So the shift is in place. This isn't like a new shift. What may have happened with Russia and all of the sanctions, because obviously not every country in the world is adhering to the US sanctions against Russia. I mean, India is buying more and more of Russia's oil. Right.
So is China, right?
So is China, exactly. But the shift that started back in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, maybe this is coming to conclusion, because 100%, I mean, George, I really have not even one little doubt in my mind, but we are 100% at the end of this whole big experiment. And so, what can you use to protect yourself from a hyperinflationary burnout, and that's gold. And so, those countries that are accumulating gold are becoming more desirable to hold as reserve and to use, because gold is the factor that makes country to country trust each other. I mean, it has no borders.
Yeah, right. And it has no counterparty risk. It's settlement in and of itself. It's final settlement. It's no one else's liability, basically.
Exactly.
So I think when you start talking about hyperinflation, people look at the DXY and they say, okay, Lynette, well, the dollar has gone from 95 on the DXY up to, let's say, 105, I think maybe down to 102, 103, something like that. But and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think when you're talking about this, this old system that we're moving away from it, you're talking about the fiat system in general, not necessarily just the United States dollar.
Correct.
And so, Brent Johnson, as an example, his argument would be, well, Lynette, that's true, but Japan and Europe is in even worse position than the United States. They're going to have to do more QE. They're going to have to do more debt monetization. They're going to have to do more stimmy checks, more government deficit spending. So the dollar is only relative to those other currencies when you're measuring it on the DXY. Now,
Correct.
your point is that all the currencies are going to hyperinflate, I'll use that term loosely, against true money at the end of the day, which is gold. Now, some of these smaller countries' currencies could do a little bit better, but as far as these main currencies, the dollar, the euro, the yen, these are going to fall massively against gold in the future years because of this transition onto a new system.
Yes, but let me also add that it isn't just against gold. It's against anything that's really tangible and real. Okay. And so much of what we see happening in the stock and the bond market with that level of volatility, I feel like we are already in the storm and the currency bridge is swinging this way and that way. And then at some point, there will be some factor that will enable or promote a crumbling of the whole system, because they've got to put the new system in place. And we have to feel enough pain to just automatically accept it. And, much as they've been, trying this experiment in different countries to see how easily people will accept it, meaning like El Salvador with using a digital currency.
Right.
Well, yeah, we've got the Fed now accounts, right? You push a button, put money in there and say, hey, go spend this before Friday the 15th or whatever that is. What are people going to do? Well, it's free money. It's free money. At least that's the perception. They'll go use it, but then will they reload it? They're having some challenges with that. Some countries that are attempting that. So they need to figure that out. But if we're scared enough, and if, say, the digital currency is set up to appear to maintain value better than the other currency, then what will people think? They will think, oh, okay, this is safer, so this is okay. And they'll give you as much as they need to give you to get you addicted or at least comfortable and confident in that new system. Like, how do you catch a wild hog? Right? You put in those. Oh, you don't? Well, I have heavily up in my bug out house. Well, the way that you do it is you take some feed and you put it in a place.
Okay.
And at first, the hogs will stay away from it, but after a day or so or whatever, no other activity, okay, they'll go in and eat. And then at night, you go in and you put up just one side of the fence. Well, they're a little weary of it, but once it stays there, they don't see any activity, they go and they eat. And then you put up the second side and the same thing happens. You put up the third side, the same thing happens. And now they're so comfortable that that's where they're going to get their food. It's real easy to put up the fourth side and you got them.
Oh, yeah, right. Boiling the frog slowly.
Yes. Yes.
When you're talking about this digital, you're talking about a central bank digital currency.
Yes, I am. I am referring primarily to central bank digital currency because it's programmable money. Yeah, and then they track every single penny of income. They track every single penny of outgo, but they can direct that. And they can direct how long that money is good for. And, what did the government tell us? That digital currencies are really good because then they can do lifetime taxes. And guess what? They can pull your taxes out every single day or every single time a paycheck hits. Oh, you made this much, we're pulling out this much. And what are you going to do about it? Nothing. And, for central banks, they want to be able to implement policy in real time.
Right.
So it takes 18 months to run through the system now. You're not spending enough? Okay. There are then, their words, not mine, no limitations on how low they could push those interest rates. So you're sitting there watching your bank account evaporate. You're not even shopping. What are you likely to do? So it's more obvious than the erosion of value that the inflation creates, but they're out of purchasing power to rob.
Yeah.
So
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting though, Lynette? I think you just made a great point that most people don't realize, is that inflation essentially is a negative interest rate.
Yes, it is.
But for some reason, if people were receiving a negative interest rate in their bank account, they would go ballistic.
Right.
They would completely lose their mind. But yet they've got right now, according to the government, they're paying a negative 8.3% interest rate, due to consumer price inflation, and they don't connect those dots. But somehow a negative interest rate coming directly out of their account to where their balance was actually decreasing, then it makes it obvious to them.
Exactly. And it's just like when you look at their definition of price stability. Now, if you say, well, price stability to most people, what they would think is that the price stays just the same, right? It's the stable price. But that's not actually what that means. What that means is that they are robbing you of your purchasing power at a low enough pace that you don't really notice it. And therefore, you as a worker do not ask for more money to compensate for that loss.
Yeah.